Yeah, we need to take that pall off of these things that just like you're compromising. You're not compromising. You're just spending less money.
Hi there, and welcome to the Guns Podcast US. I'm your host, Brent Wheat, and I'd like to welcome you to one of the world's biggest gun talk programs as we chat about the interesting stuff that makes up the world of shooting. And of course, I'm joined by, last week I called him my illustrious co-host, today my honorable co-host, Roy Huntington. Howdy, Roy.
I'm always amazed when you say one of the biggest gun podcasts in the industry, but then you look at the numbers and I go, well, no, actually it is.
Yeah, exactly. It's crazy. And the funny thing is, I don't think we're the most well-known. We fly under the radar because we don't wave our hands.
Because we're smart.
Yeah, there's that. But no, we appreciate everybody watching and listening. And we're episode, 344, I think is this one. We've been doing this a while. And now I mentioned it last show that this is kind of the club. We may not be the most well known, but we've got a giant audience, and we all feel like we're buddies here. So, that's always been my vision for this. We're kind of the old guys sitting at the end of the counter at the gun store, and we welcome you to pull up a stool and a chair, or actually, it's hot enough now. I've switched to iced tea, but pull up a chair, grab a beverage, and we're going to talk about stuff that everybody likes to talk about in the world of shooting. And today, Roy, I'm going to ask you a question. Do I need $1,000 or $1,500 snub-nose revolver?
If you have any class at all, yes.
Okay, but do I need one?
Well, no, because neither one of us have enough class that we need one.
Exactly.
And here's living proof are 2 Charter Arms Snubbies that I proudly own.
Exactly. Well, and I got an LCR, a Ruger LCR sitting right here.
There we go.
And that's what we're going to talk about today, that we've made it abundantly clear. We like interesting and we like expensive guns, but we're real people too. In fact, we're writers, so we're maybe more real in terms of socioeconomic reach than a lot of folks. So we're going to discuss the issue of can you get by with a snubby that's under, say, $600-$700? And, basically, some people may call them a cheap snubby. A lot of folks would call them a budget snubby. And we're going to explore that world today because, honestly, a lot of folks cannot afford the real expensive guns. And even if you can afford them, do you really need one? And that's what we're going to tackle today. So, Roy, I already threw it to you, and you've already pointed out you own several budget guns, and I do too. So what do you think the appeal, whether somebody can afford it or not? Budget's one issue, but if somebody can afford something more expensive, why would they choose a less expensive pocket gun, snub nose, 38, whatever they choose?
First of all, I think we need to rewrite all of the rules right now. Okay. So I'm going to take a minute or two and rewrite all the rules. Well, you remember when the AR-15 silliness all started and they were talking about high capacity magazines and all that kind of stuff. And the NRA came out and said, well, no, actually, a 20 round magazine is a standard capacity magazine for that rifle. Yep. Right. So then they became standard capacity magazines. Right. Well, okay. I say that guns like your LCR and the Charter Arms and the Taurus and the Rossi and the other ones, those are standard price revolvers.
Good point.
You see?
Good point.
They're not necessarily budget or cheap, because you say budget and that means like cheap, right?
To some people, yes.
Yeah. When I buy the budget fill in the blank anything, people go, oh.
Yeah. I'm sorry, you couldn't afford
a real one. Yeah, exactly. So I've always believed this, is that no, these are just it's like regular gas, right?
Yeah.
We don't call that sub-premium gas, right?
That's
I just
a good
made
point.
That up, by the way.
Yeah,
right?
Sub-premium.
No, they're not sub-premium. They're what they are.
Yeah.
They're a $25 socket set, Sears Craftsman from the old days. You know, nobody ever called those budget,
That's a good point.
Yeah, everyone looked at them and said, oh, no, those are good tools. They do the job, right?
Yep.
So, so in today's world where, a Smith & Wesson J-frame costs $1,000, right?
Yeah.
And I remember my first J-frame in 1973 was $139. I also remember that was hard to pay for, at my $1.45 an hour, and so proportionally, I think the costs are still very similar, but I think we need to get away from that whole, that where people look down at you. Oh, you carry a snubby? Yeah. What do you carry? Oh, I carry a Taurus. And they go, oh.
I've had that happen. I with the new regime at Taurus, which is now, I guess, the standard regime. Taurus back in the day, there was a lot of issues. In the last, I would call it 10-ish years. They've got a plant now in, what is it, Brunswick? No, someplace down in Georgia, because I've been there.
Yeah.
And the quality has improved significantly. And just not too long ago, though, I mentioned that, I occasionally carry this Taurus. And my friend's like, oh. And I said, no, I'm telling you. I've reviewed them. I've shot them. They work.
Friends don't let friends carry Taurus. Right?
Yeah, I remember those days, and it was legit. It was true. They had some real quality control issues.
Days, all those Rossi, all those kind of guns.
Yep. And they fixed that.
Yeah, so I think we need to stop saying, how much money do you have to spend on a gun? You have these choices, right? And so, if you go buy entry level Kia, people don't say, oh, you're buying a budget Kia.
Yeah.
No, you're just buying an entry-level Kia. No, that's all. And so I think that's how we need to treat these guns. And then people won't be afraid, because I know there are people out there right now who are listening to this who are going, I would love to have a pocket revolver, a snubby revolver. I don't have the money to spend $1,000 on one. And they're mortified to buy a $450 Charter Arms because they're afraid what people are going to talk about. It's like, oh, you bought that? They go to the indoor range and they whip their Charter Arms revolver out, and they're afraid people are going to run with their hair on fire, fleeing in terror. And first of all, who cares if they do? But second of all, we need to take that, what's the right word? That pall off of these things, that just like you're compromising. You're not compromising. You're just spending less money.
Yep. And as we've talked about numerous times before, this is the golden age. There's very few shooting products on the market that are garbage. There's some that we agree are solutions in search of a problem, but in terms of quality, because of manufacturing and technology, it's hard to find a junk gun. You find individual guns that kind of slip through the quality control net, but
from anybody,
overall,
from any manufacturer,
exactly. And that's okay. Sidebar. That's a topic for another show. Used to. And maybe I'm thinking of the good old days that didn't really exist. It seems like your lesser expensive guns, there would be a higher percentage of problem guns that came through. Now that seems to have leveled out. I think the lesser expensive guns, generally the quality's gone way up. And I have to say, and we've talked about this, some of our friends at some of the premium manufacturers have had some real head scratchers about how did this get out the door? I mean, some literal garbage stuff did this fall off the table and they just threw it into a shipping box? So I think that gap has narrowed quite a bit.
Well, and I think the reason for that, because I've thought about this before, is that just 30 years ago, when Taurus was making a revolver in Brazil or something, these were pretty much kind of hand assembled guns made, on manually run machines and stamping presses and right. And so, you are getting what you pay for in those days. These people are not as skilled as the old guy who works at Colt or at Smith & Wesson. And so in those days, you were getting truly hand-built, hand-fit guns from the big makers here versus sort of assembly line, kind of roughly put together guns that kind of functioned, right? But nowadays, see, you're exactly right. With the rise of CNC machining, somebody in Brazil or wherever pushes the go button on a CNC machine, and out comes 5,000 exactly perfect frames.
Yep.
You know, but now the opposite side of that, though, I think, and this addresses what you're talking about. The big makers are constantly trying to go save money, save money, save money, save money. What can we do? What can we do? What can we do? Right. So there's less and less and less and less actual human intervention in gun building amongst even the big makers.
Yeah.
So I think it's almost like they're kind of meeting now.
Yep.
Right.
Agreed.
So, because I'll go on record and say that even though they're still good guns, overall general fit finish quality control, I think, has dropped a little bit with some of the makers mechanically more than anything, in their quest to get product out the door, whereas risen with the more affordable guns. So I think that's kind of where we are. So don't sneer at these affordable, snubby revolvers.
Agreed. And I actually did some homework here, Roy, before the episode. And I'm going to go down this list because there was some stuff I didn't realize. I did a survey, and this is all MSRP. And as we know, you can find it cheaper on the street, sometimes significantly cheaper if you do your shopping. But at the very bottom of the list is the Taurus 856. It's a 2 or 3 inch 38 plus P 6-shot revolver. MSRP on that bad boy is $380. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, that's a $289 retail gun.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
And the next step up would be the Taurus 605. That's a 2-inch 357 Magnum. So for under $400, if you want to carry a 2-inch 357, you can do it. And then we go to Charter Arms, the undercover off duty. Those MSRP around $4.5. EAA Windicator. I'm not super familiar with that one. But according to the Charter Arms Bulldog is still out there if you want the 44 special, which is a great round, and so on and so forth. The Smith & Wesson Bodyguard 38, which is what I carry daily. I didn't realize MSRP on it's only $570. So, and then you can get up into the Smith & Wesson 442 airweight at $590, the 642 airweight. LCR is $599, which I didn't realize it was that much. I thought they were less than that, but you'll typically find them discounted significantly. But anyway, coming in right under my $1 under my criteria was the Smith & Wesson airweight 637 38 plus P. That came in at $599. So anyway, there's lots of stuff here, and as Roy said, I mean, people may older guys may look at you funny if you're carrying a $380 Taurus, but they're a lot better than they used to be, and I wouldn't be afraid to carry one. And I think this goes true with whether you're talking less expensive or more expensive guns. You better take it to the range, and you better burn more than 1 or 2 cylinders full. You better burn some boxes, and then you will know that this gun is a cherry. It's fine. I can carry it. Whereas, I said just a minute ago, you may get a top flight gun and then suddenly realize this thing isn't working out of the factory, and I paid $1,200 for it. What's going on here? So again, it goes back to don't worry about the brand, the price. Make sure it works and make sure you're competent with it. So.
Well, I got a top quality revolver from a major firearms maker 4 or 5 years ago, and I brought it home, took it out of the box. It was a small frame revolver, and I pulled the trigger, and it felt pretty gritty.
Mm-hmm.
And then I pulled the trigger again, and it locked up. It was a brand new gun. MSRP was like $1,000, right? So Me being me, I took it apart, right? And there were shavings inside,
Are you kidding me?
No, and it was in a particular nook where they would run a milling cutter and cut like this flange inside. Yeah. And so I later found out after I called and talked to them, as they said, that's been a bit of a problem. Evidently, when they make that cut, it doesn't always clear out all the swarf. Yeah. But there it was. And so that proves what you say. I mean, I know people who buy a new gun, load it, and carry it. I mean, when I had a gun store in San Diego, it was amazing the number of times people would policemen. I remember vividly one guy, he comes in, he buys a used Model 39, right? And he had a holster on, an empty holster on. So he came in, he had bought the gun, he picked it up. This is a used Smith & Wesson Model 39 from the old days, right? The older 39, which I wouldn't trust as far as you could throw it.
Yeah.
And so he had some issue ammunition with him, and he took it, and he looked at it, he loaded it up, chambered it, put it in his holster. And my partner and I both looked at him just, thunderstruck. We said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "What?" We said, "You don't even know if it works." "Oh, yeah, it'll work."
Wow.
We didn't test fire it,
Yeah.
I mean,
that's horrifying.
Yeah. So don't be that guy,
Yeah.
But,
and that kind of goes to another topic or another point I wanted to talk about is when you're talking a lesser expensive revolver, the beauty of that is some of your lesser expensive semi-autos, again, they're a lot better than they used to be, but semi-autos are more finicky about feeding, extracting, things like that. That's something that's talked about a lot. With a revolver, either it goes bang or it doesn't, and if it doesn't, you pull the trigger again. So I think there's a little more built-in redundancy with a revolver than there is that small semi-auto. So again, that's really on you. You should know if your gun works, whatever you're carrying. But I do like the fact, and as we've talked at length, one of the reasons my daily carry in my pocket is that revolver, because even if I didn't do my job and clean the lint and cheeseburgers and field ticks out of it, if it doesn't go bang, I press the trigger again. And as long as one of those 5 shots go on and I'm doing my job, hopefully that will take care of that problem. So,
well, let's talk about the reality of mechanics, though. I work on a lot of guns for my friends and for me and stuff like that. And I just finished doing it's a funny thing, but like a full custom build on a Charter Arms Undercover 38, right?
Yeah.
Which I know people recoil in horror, when they see that. But when I do a video about it, they always come out of the woodwork and they say, well, they're almost embarrassed. They say, "Oh, I own a Charter Arms," but you can tell they're like just a little afraid to admit it.
Yeah.
And they said, "Well, is that something somebody could do to my gun?" And it's like, yes. And so, but what I have learned on working all these guns, Taurus, Rossi, Charter, all the sort of basic guns, these standard capacity, 38s, is that they can be a little more crunchy than a $800 gun from maybe Smith & Wesson, for instance, or Colt. But that doesn't mean they're not going to work, like you say. So, so you have to make that sort of, if you want to call it a compromise, then it's a compromise. An entry-level Ford pickup truck is different from a high-end Mercedes,
right?
And so they both go 75 miles an hour, but they do it differently. And so that's what you've got with one of these guns. Having said that, you can install a aftermarket spring kit. One of the things that I recommend people do, if you buy a new small frame revolver from somebody, or a new revolver, from one of the makers who do the more affordable guns, first thing I like to do is make sure it's empty. Squirt a little light gun oil down in the action and just dry fire the snot out of it.
Yep.
Literally while you're watching TV, is that you just dry fire it hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times.
Yep.
And squirt a little more oil, and it won't hurt anything. And you will find that they will smooth out, and it also helps you uncover what Brent was talking about is, will it develop any glitches or hitches or something like that? But yeah, it works really good. It works for any of these guns too. So,
honestly, I had forgotten about that. Back in the day when you were issued a revolver new out of the box, that's what they told you. Make sure it's empty and sit there and just pull the trigger all night and the next night till you've got thousands of trigger pulls, and it will smooth things out and you'll find any malfunctions. So
it really does, and then while you're doing that, periodically stop and open up the cylinder, right? And then close the cylinder open it and close it because you're getting everything all worn in there nice. And you put snap caps in it if you want to. Put your ammo in the other side of the house so it's not anywhere near. Use some common sense. Keep the muzzle in a safe direction. Don't blow your TV set up. And but yeah, just dry fire it. And I mean, I'll be honest with you. I don't know. Honestly, 95% of any problem I see with these little guns, you can fix just by dry firing. Somebody says, "Hey, Roy, my gun's kind of glitchy. It kind of locks up the action every once in a while." Okay, yeah, let me see it. Squirt, 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 dry fire about 100 times, and then hand it back, and when the gun's fixed.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, since you work on a lot of guns and you work on a full range of guns, is there any common problem that you see that doesn't necessarily affect the higher end guns? Because I was sitting there thinking like timing, but timing is kind of one of those things that it doesn't matter how expensive or how inexpensive the gun is. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. But is there any things that you would suggest for folks, if you're going to buy a $400 new revolver, you should be looking at this point or that point?
Well, first, if I'm standing at the gun counter, right, you clear the gun, and I would just make sure it works, right? In other words, push the cylinder latch, make sure it unlocks the cylinder, rotate the cylinder, see if it's grinding or binding anywhere, And I do the same test if I'm looking at $1,000 gun. Because sometimes it does bind. Run the ejector rod, see if it's sticky, what's going on there. Dry fire it in a safe direction. The one thing I will say, and that people will do this way more often than we tend to talk about, is especially if they don't have a lot of experience shooting double action, when they dry fire a double action revolver, they tend to ride the trigger forward and short stroke it. And so many times I see people say, "Oh, my gun locks up on me," right? And then so I take their gun and I double action shoot and works fine. And I say, "Well, now you do it." And then they go click, 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 and it locks up. And what they're doing is that they're riding the trigger forward, right? So we have an empty gun here. So they're riding the trigger forward. It doesn't quite reset completely. And then now look, I just locked this up. I can't pull the trigger again. It's locked completely up. And that's because I didn't let it fully expand, and now it'll work. So that's what I would do, is I would make those basic safety checks. But then when you're dry firing, concentrate on the fact is when you dry fire, get your finger all the way off that trigger. I mean, just let it completely reset and pull it back in. But that's really the only thing. I mean, they can be a little crunchy, because you don't have the same amount of personal attention as you do with the more expensive guns. And so, but that doesn't mean they're not good guns. It's like detailing your car. Just detail your gun after you get it.
Yeah. Well, in that vein, I just had a buddy that, we're not going to talk about used guns per se, but this is a good example of what you might run into. Is he bought a 2-inch, I think it was a Model 10, an early Model 10, and off a lady whose husband had passed away. And he said he kind of, not sight unseen, but she showed him what it was, and he's like, "Yeah, I'll give you." He got it pretty right. And she said, "It's kind of dirty." It was so dirty. There was literally gunk and grease in the lock work. And I'm talking to him, and he's kind of a gun guy, but he doesn't know anything about revolvers. And I said, "Did you take the side plate off?" I said, don't. He goes, "Yeah, I already did." And I'm like, "Oh, what's it look like?" And he goes, "Well, that's why the cylinder release isn't working, because there's all kinds of gunk up in there." And it's like, with these snubbies, especially pocket guns, especially, they tend to get carried and carried and carried, and a lot of folks never clean them. So they tend to be, I think, a lot more gunkier, especially inside, maybe than some other used guns. Any gun could be filthy, but I think old pocket snubbies tend to be the filthiest of the filthy. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Different from a holster gun that's protected. Yeah. You brought up a good point too, which is the other thing is, even when you get a brand new revolver, like a Charter or whatever, you fill in the blank. I would also come home from the gun store with a can of, any of the spray gun cleaners, the blast out or whatever they call them. And the first thing I would do when I get home is I would cock the hammer back and then take the grips off and go outside and give it a real good squirt, in every orifice, just squirt it all out really, really, really good. Cause that'll help to flush out those little last bit of swarf and bits of burr metal and, stuff that's left in there from the manufacturing process. If you have a used gun, it's really important to do just because of that. Had he just cocked the hammer and squirted some kind of blast cleaner down through the action, that would have cleaned it out. After you do that, though, make sure you put some oil inside.
Yeah.
And can I one more thing? People, I hear it all the time, and I see it sometimes, is they say, "Oh, I bought this new gun, and I immediately bought a Wolf spring kit and installed it." Well, that's actually the worst thing you can do, because when you buy a new gun like that, the first thing you need to do is to go ahead and dry fire it and break it in and seat everything. Now replace the springs. See, and you'll have a smoother action, and the springs will be more effective. Because if you have a rough action, and now you put light springs in, you'll still have a rough action. It's just the trigger pull might feel a little bit lighter. So
that's a great point.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really important thing. So,
well, the funny epilogue to my friend's story is, and I'm not sure, he was trying to describe it to me. It sounds like maybe the spring for the cylinder latch, but I'm not absolutely sure. It turned into what we used to call the Jesus spring, because when you're taking something apart and it goes foing, you go, oh, whatever. So, and he goes, I've been down on my hands and knees. I've had a bright flashlight. I got my magnetic sweeper. No, it's gone. It's in low Earth orbit. So, not being a revolver guy, and he asked if I would take care of it, and I'm not. I'm a auto pistol armorer, but I stay away from revolvers because I know my limits. But I had him call a buddy who works on them. He's like, I lost that spring, didn't you? Yeah. So he took him the infamous, and I told him the story of Roy Huntington, the bag-o gun. He had to take it to his buddy, and can you put this back together? So it's all running now, and it's clean, and the finish on it's only about 40%, but otherwise I don't think it was shot much at all. So he's got a nice pocket gun for a good price.
I like those old police guns. You can see those. And we have to dance a careful dance here. Thank you, YouTube community guidelines. But if you look and do your research for scientific and educational purposes,
well played, sir.
Right. Sometimes there are some very interesting options concerned old police guns out there. And a lot of police guns are shot not that much and carried a lot, so they look like that. They're usually worn on the outside. Grips are banged up from being knocked on the police cars and doors in the office and stuff like that. But usually they're like really good, solid working guns. And I agree. But I think if you're listening to this and you think, oh, I wish I had another small frame revolver or my first small frame revolver. I know we've helped to generate a huge interest in 32 Magnum and the 32 calibers. And I hear regularly from people who say, man, I've been watching you guys, watching your videos, listening to podcasts. I bought my first 32. And a lot of times, most of the time, even it's one of the more affordable brands,
Yeah.
And they say, man, I mean, this is great. I love it. I wish I would have bought it earlier. So yeah, pull the trigger, as it were. If you're interested in that, this is a good way to kind of be introduced to it.
Absolutely. And I'll leave you with one thing that a famous shooting instructor whom I knew pretty well, his main piece that he carried all the time was a Charter Arms Bulldog, and it'd been customized. That was the first place I'd ever seen my brain is completely faded. The big front sight, big dot.
Big dot. Sight. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know why that was so tough for me to get, but anyway, he had the first, and that was his, all the time 100% gun. And, I have a friend who now has that gun, but here's a guy that literally, if I said his name, which I'm not going to, you would know who it was. Everybody knows who he was. And he could literally probably call just about any manufacturer and say, hey, would you send me this and I'll carry it? But he chose a Charter Arms Bulldog. He liked the 44 Special, and that was just his gun. And he literally probably slept with it if I knew the truth. But if that guy thinks highly enough of a quote unquote less expensive small revolver, then I guess it's good enough for me. So,
well, I'm holding up a 1978 vintage Charter Arms Bulldog 44 Special that I've had since new, that I carried in an ankle holster on the police department. And here we are, what is it, 45 years later, 50 years later, right? And guess what? I still have that gun, and I still put it in my pocket.
Yep.
You know, and I'm a bit like you were talking about that guy. You are too. We could have any gun in the entire industry, and that gun, a little Charter undercoverette and 32 Magnum. Those are actually the two revolvers that's what I have.
Yeah.
That's what I carry.
So I wanted to go full circle and draw the conclusion here. I think what you said is probably some of the most important words that we've really said here on the podcast. It's just that whole idea of they're not budget guns, they're just less expensive guns. And, if you have all the money in the world and you want to buy a really expensive, good for you. We encourage that. And I want to come over and see it. But I think there's a lot more of us that we do. Well, how often do you see on the internet? Yeah, I bought a Charter Arms Bulldog, but I'm going to get me whatever. And it's like, why? Mm-hmm. You've got a perfectly serviceable gun there, and there's no shame, no embarrassment, and maybe that's why we're going to get drummed out of the He-Man Gun Writers Club, Roy, because we don't. You've got to have a $1,500 2-inch, Master Blaster, or you're just the unwashed masses. Well,
I did a review of the Charter or the Rock Island. They're inexpensive revolvers, the 2-inch and a 4-inch, the 200 and the 206, I think they call them. It doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. Well, I've seen those for $179.
Yeah,
and they can be a little crunchy, but if you do what we said, which is take it home, clean it out, squirt some oil in it, dry fire it, make sure you let the trigger return every time. Guess what? They smooth out. And they work fine. But what was interesting is when I did that first video, that it was like you turned the faucet on in the comments.
Yeah.
People who own those guns. And they've always been afraid to admit it. And, they come out and I go, yeah, I know. People kind of, I don't really like to tell them, but man, I've had one of these and I love it. I carry it. It shoots every day. I carry it when I'm out walking around in the woods and, all these people are perfectly happy, but they're just like, they're all afraid to admit,
Yep.
So
don't be afraid. You own what you own. And if it works for you, we're happy. So
it's, what it is, truly. I think the analogy I said earlier probably makes more sense than I thought it did at the time, which is it's regular, premium, and super premium. That's all it is.
Yeah.
So there's like regular snubbies, premium snubbies, and then super premium. Maybe you're buying a 3-inch Korth revolver, right?
Yeah.
But that's all it is. And I don't look down on you if you put regular gas in your Ford.
Yeah.
Oh, you're burning regular gas. Well, I guess you can't afford premium, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. That's absolutely true. And honestly, Roy, I know how you and I are. We love Korth. We've reviewed them. I've had it a couple here, and they're spectacular. But if I see a guy pull a 2-inch Korth out of his pocket and go, yeah, that's my carry gun, it's like, well, how about that? That's something. So, we ought to be looking the other way. Yeah, I guess.
We're not saying don't do it. Not at all.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a Korth. I'll admit it, and it's a pleasure every time I look at it.
They're works of art.
But in my other hand, I have my, I think it was $119 when I bought it, and,
I didn't really think about this, but part of it, and I'd be interested to get your thoughts on this, Roy. when I have something that is not pretty and fancy, I don't overly baby it. It is easier to use and carry. And an example is I got my Colt Officer's model, and until I put the first ding in it, I babied that thing. And there was times I didn't want to carry it because it's going to get marred up. And then, of course, once it starts accumulating what they call character, then it's like, it's my working gun and all that. But, I think there's something to that. You spend a whole lot of money on something and it's like, I don't know, it's be careful. Don't look at it. I don't want to damage it. And that's one of the reasons I like a lesser expensive gun, because if you're being honest, carrying a gun every day, it's going to accumulate character. It's going to accumulate cheeseburgers and a little bit of rust. And it just is if you're doing what you say you do, which is carrying a gun every day. So.
Well, when we first moved here 18 years ago, I had a tractor gun. My tractor gun was a Smith & Wesson Model 25 in 45 Colt that had been customized by Hamilton Bowen, right? But it was the only gun I really had that I could shoot CCI shot cartridges out of, which was what I wanted to do on the tractor. And so I had a flapped holster and I carried it around, but I was always mortified because, at the end of the day, you look and it's covered in dust and grit. And, and it was like, oh man, and so I would clean it up. I spent a lot of times worrying about it and, and, oh no, I got rained on and the guns, and and then finally Taurus sent me I forget what they call it, polymer frame circuit judge or something, right? Yeah. A little short barreled judge, right? Plastic gun. And so I thought, hey, I have a perfect solution now. Yep. So I loaded that sucker up with 410 and 45 Colt, and it rides in an old gritty flapped holster on the tractor. And at the end of the day, it is absolutely completely covered with grit and crap and bugs and everything, and I don't lose 1 second of sleep over it. Exactly. So that it was a good analogy. You're exactly right. I mean, if I drop my old beat up Charter Arms here, I just pick it up, make sure I didn't break anything, and stick it back in my pocket. So
because it goes back to the first rule of a gunfight: have a gun.
Boy, it's true. So all right. Well, I would just like to say that if you want to have a small frame revolver and you can't afford to spend a lot of money on it, then just go buy one you can afford. Yeah.
Exactly. And you're probably going to get a good one, and just make sure that it is. Take it out, shoot it, dry fire it a bunch, and it'll serve you just fine. So anyway, a great topic. Had a lot of fun, and I forgot that whole dry fire thing. Yeah, that was always a thing when we first started doing it. So see, even I learn stuff every week here on the podcast. But before we go, our usual housekeeping, make sure you stop by gunsmagazine.com. I still write there. There's lots of, it would take you years to read all the good articles there. So, and we're posting new stuff every day almost. So go to gunsmagazine.com, sign up for the newsletters where you can get all the great gun goodness delivered daily to your inbox. And of course, stop by gunspodcast.us. That thing is taking off, and I'm starting to get regular updates of we're selling stuff. So if you want a t-shirt, a mug, they're not fancy. They're just like we are, just solid. And you can go to Guns Podcast US, read stuff, sign up. It's got an email list, and you can buy merch there. So anyway, hopefully we had a great talk and inspired you to go out and buy another regular price snub nose revolver and carry it regularly. So anyway, on behalf of my, illustrious co-host Roy Huntington, I am the Guns Podcast host, Brent Wheat, reminding you yet again, it's time to get out there and get shooting.